Hey there YouTube, I'm Ikitsu, this is the Ikitsu Times. Welcome to my channel, welcome to a little bit of Age of Wonders Planetfall. So today I want to talk a little bit about the Amazon Voidtech. And this combination is going to be a fairly quick video. The reason is that this combination isn't as much about the interesting sort of units and item combinations as it is something slightly different. So there is some of that, but let's start jumping into the most important part of this combination, and that is it has one of the most ridiculous economy boosts that I can even conceptualize. So yeah, let's take a look at quickly what we're getting here. So obviously ecological construction for that early game boost to production is really, really powerful, but also ecological warfare makes you a little bit more efficient in the early game, giving your units that extra kick in terms of how much damage they can do without costing you really anything else. So all of this, of course, is going to be pretty good no matter what you're doing. Next up, you gain access to quantum gain, and this doesn't start off amazing, but as you gain larger populations, Echo Protocols is a really, really powerful boost to how much you're capable of producing, and it produces a lot more of everything, which is a little bit nice for you since you do have sort of fairly diverse economy needs. Of course, you don't really need preventative surveillance, I find. You could definitely apply it if you find you need it for some reason, but generally not. Next up, you get Guy and Stewardship. Progressive Cultivation is a little bit less important, honestly. Gaining +8 food this late into the game is not huge, but +8 from Arcadian sectors is pretty nice, especially because you will probably want to get a couple Arcadian sectors for that energy boost by changing some of your sectors over towards energy type systems. And this can make it so that systems that were otherwise kind of not really that great can be made into ones that are producing a bunch of extra food as well as a bunch of extra energy, which is really, really great for this faction. Next up is the Advanced Wildlife Militarization, which again makes your units much more powerful and much more efficient. This is a really nice one since it does affect your Echo Walker since they are mounted. And of course you also get the Arborean Monitoring Station, which gives you that extra 6 research. So what you're looking at is a situation where you're getting a little bit of every resource, but you're getting a lot of production, a little bit of food, and a lot of research. And this is actually a lovely sort of setup under normal circumstances, and under normal playthroughs with this faction with the Amazons, you're struggling a little bit in terms of your energy because you're sort of being pushed towards that early game production sort of rush there, and you're like prioritizing research because you can't build for research, you can't change your sectors into research ones. But then you hit Quantum Leap, which gives you access to quantum energy tapping. And in conjunction with the ability to get the Arborean at around the same time, you're suddenly building a ton of energy with this faction, and that's going to help you a lot with what you're wanting and producing more military more quickly because of the where is this thing? The Clone Predator. This is 200 energy per cast, which is quite a lot of energy, but it's still actually not that bad. What normally limits you in terms of like spamming this is that if you really want to churn out these things, you'd have to be earning 200 energy per turn. And with this combination, that's actually not that hard, even when you're paying upkeep. Clone Predator produces very powerful tier 3 monster type units, and these things are capable of doing a lot of damage to the enemies for what ends up being relatively cheap when you're comparing it to like the production cost combined with all the other costs. So restorative cloning is one of the best free unit or operation-based units that you can get in the game. So going through a society tab again here, you also gain access to the Quantum Project. By the time you got this, like since to use this you need to be building research sectors, and if you're building a bunch of research sectors, you already have a ton of science, so you don't ever really need this. Like it's kind of a waste. You're also gaining extra science already from the Arborean Monitoring Station, so unfortunately you don't need the Quantum Project in this particular case there. I find that the Quantum Project is when you are building a science-heavy faction, and you really just need to get that huge boost out of a smaller number of research parks. Then Quantum Project is a little bit better, but here, not so much. It's really all about the quantum energy tapping. Going further along, though, you get Bio Crusade, which is capable of giving you that extra kick there, and the Arboreal Eden. Arboreal Eden's not that important. The reason it's not is that by the time you hit this, you should be able to roll over the enemy so quickly that you're going to just not need it. And also, generally speaking, I find that you don't have to have... You don't just need to have those happiness events to boost your economy all that much at this point in time. So yeah, I think that Bio Crusade's pretty good, but ultimately speaking, it's Quantum Leap that and Quantum Energy Tapping that's giving you something pretty powerful for this. So anyhow, let's take a look at our other techs here. Again, Restorative Cloning here for the Clone Predator, as well as the Arcadian Restoration, as well as the Forest Reforestation. These things work really, really well in conjunction with the way that Voidtech works and sort of demands of Voidtech. But let's go through their units and stuff like that. Now, there's no synergy whatsoever between biochemical or laser into the Voidtech units or things like that, although I do find that there are quite a lot of good Amazon techs for the Echo Walkers. So first of all, you get the Phase Walk Modulator. This is kind of okay for a lot of the stuff that the Amazons use. They have a lot less sort of mobility for some of their units than you would expect, so the fact that you can get them through terrain a little bit more easily does help them quite a bit, as well as the ability to make it so that your relatively shorter range units are capable of closing a little bit more efficiently. But even with that said, I don't find it necessary under very many circumstances, and usually I just go without them. Their version of the Echo Walker is the Lancer type, so as you can see it's mounted here. It's got the Void Glaive rather than the standard, and this is a single action. Now this does cause some interesting interactions with these guys and makes me play them very, very different. Because you can get a ton of extra damage by using the Void Glaive rather than throwing a Quantum Grenade, unlike with many of the other versions of this guy, what I prefer doing is walking my first Echo Walker straight up to the enemy, creating a Quantum Echo directly behind them, and then having the one behind them flank attack, and then having the front one, once they've spun around, attack them for a secondary flank. And this is often enough to kill a unit or cause tremendous amounts of damage to a unit. And because single attack high damage effects are usually more impactful than throwing grenades, I don't actually equip my Echo Walkers in this case with the Quantum Pulse Grenades, which is weird because that's usually one of the main strengths of taking a bunch of Echo Walkers, is that you can get twice as much grenade spam out there because they only have a single action anyway. In this case, their single action is much more powerful spent on their actual core attack. However, that said, these guys do suffer from the fact that they are a single attack action unit, and because of that, they're not as capable in terms of that sustained damage output that the other Echo Walkers are capable of doing. As well, they're also worse at applying dimensional instability to things. So it's a slightly weird unit with a lot of pluses and minuses to them. On the whole, though, I still think that they're a pretty good unit. Next up, you get the ability of the Void Augmentation. I tend to find that this is a little bit less useful for this combination. I don't find that this is as much a combination that runs on applying lots of dimensional instability, especially because you don't have kinetic weapons outside of some of the animals that you find will have kinetic weapons that you could gain some benefit from this. And of course, the Echo Walker stuff themselves benefits from that. But it's such a weak debuff compared to a lot of the others that I don't find it to be that impressive. I do find the phase manipulators to be a little bit more useful for the Amazons than I do for some of the other factions. The reason for this being that their relatively squishy low tier units have relatively short ranges, so the ability to use Evacuate does help quite a bit in that instance, whereas if I'm playing something like the Vanguard, I've got such long range that I pretty much never need to use phase manipulators, and if I'm playing something like Syndicate, the same thing applies. They've got lots of long range options that don't really require me to use things like Evacuate or Abduct. By contrast, the Amazons really do benefit from my ability to run a phase manipulator up relatively close to the enemy, because it won't be isolated, it won't be by itself. I'll have to have all of my other Amazon units sort of running up to go get those units as well, and being able to sort of abduct an enemy unit and have it in the midst of all my relatively short range units is a little bit more useful for the Amazons than it is for other factions. So I do think that this is a fairly strong unit in this roster, but it's not necessary. It's not one that I find is core or key to them. And then we get the Gravity Pulse Grenade. This is just not necessarily the best unit upgrade for this faction. It's okay. I have not figured out what I would put it on as the real problem there, because your standard Amazon, the Huntress, the Gravity Pulse Grenade's weaker than the Blinding Arrow, and once you've already thrown out the Blinding Arrow, you're probably in range for them to fire off 3 shots from their Bio Bow thing, and that's a lot more damage than the grenade is. I would rather use a 3 attack than a single grenade. And like I said earlier, the Echo Walkers don't really need to use the grenade either, because their single attack is so damaging that they're better off using their single action to attack instead of throw a grenade. The Biomancer as well even has a lot of options that mean I'd rather put something to sleep or heal something or do something else rather than throw a grenade with them, and it kind of goes on and on. There's just not very many units that I find really benefit too much from having those. Next up, you have access to Temporal Dislocation for this phase drive. There's a couple units that you can get that are actually quite meaningfully impacted by this. The fact that you can only apply this to heavy units is kind of interesting because we do actually have quite the roster of like heavy units, like this Quartzite Crystal Worm over here, that could throw the phase drive on here. I haven't bothered doing that just because I've been short on Cosmite a lot of this game. I haven't been focusing hard enough on getting more Cosmite. But there are actually interesting units that you can get that really benefit from the phase drive as the Amazons. So I do think that having the access to that is really quite strong. Next is the Stasis Pocket Inducer. I find this is a little bit weaker on the Amazons than it is for something like, say, the Vanguard. Having the Stasis Pocket Inducer on a bunch of Echo Walkers that also have Gravity Pulse grenades is kind of gross because you can like throw down the Echo Walker and they can throw like their grenade, and then the other guy can throw out the grenade, and then you've got a bunch of chances for Stasis Pocket Inducer to go off, as well as a bunch of chances for them to be staggered from the grenade itself. They get the stagger resistance reduction because of the dimensional instability. They get a bunch of other penalties from dimensional instability. It's kind of gross. Like, it's a really, really powerful combination. That combination is less appealing here because I'm not really fighting like that, and I'm sort of using my Echo Walkers to selectively assassinate single target units really, really quickly because I'm capable of dealing a huge amount of damage. And if they're dead, then I don't need to worry about the fact that they don't have actions anymore. It just means that instead of being able to do this to a wide number of units on a single sort of blitz thing, the Amazon Echo Walkers, instead of doing that, just finish off one unit really, really quickly. And that unit can't act anymore, and then they get more actions from the rest of their units that would have otherwise been in that pocket of area of effect. So it's kind of a mixed bag skipping out on that combination, but that is sort of the way it is there. Because as well I'm not focusing as much on dimensional instability, it's not as good to use the Stasis Pocket Inducer on units because basically you can think of it as having like a strength 6 chance of applying a repeating attacks if you've applied a bunch of dimensional instability to enemies, which makes it really likely that you can reduce the actions of units really, really brutally and really, really quickly with the Stasis Pocket Inducer if you're applying dimensional instability to them. So it's sort of a variant sort of thing there. I think that there are units, though, that still benefit from it. It is a very powerful offensive mod anyway, and it sort of makes up for the fact that there's no hard stun type abilities in the tech tree for Amazons. If you look at their weapons, there's no stun module, there's no concussion module, nothing like that. So this does sort of fill in that gap to a lesser extent there, even though it is weaker than those. Rift generators, I don't find this is super useful for the Amazons. The distortion rift coils are not really great damage, and you can't really upgrade the damage on this thing all that effectively other than putting the Stasis Pocket Inducer on it. Dimensional Desync can be actually quite useful, especially for your relatively shorter range units that are relatively squishy. Being able to Dimensional Desync something does let you save that unit. And then there is the Dimensional Rift, which is, it's good, but I don't find it to be that great. The reason is that I tend to find with Amazons I'm more in people's up close and in people's face, and this can have that sort of awkward chance of dimensional instabilizing or whatever a unit out of your range, which does not happen as often if you're using a longer range faction. Now, if I decided to go for like a Bombardon type composition here, then obviously that's a little bit less relevant, but since I tend not to go for that sort of composition, matters a lot more here. Lastly, you get Quantum Avatar. This is actually really gross. The only reason I haven't spammed this out is that it is quite expensive, but you can throw this onto your heavy animals and make them basically invincible. Whenever this unit takes damage, its attacker is teleported 1 hex away. This is absolutely gross. Grants you 2 shielding, grants things that are adjacent to it 2 shielding, or 3 shielding. You can basically cluster together like a couple heavy monsters with both of them with Quantum Avatar, and they're both going to be basically invincible, and anyone that tries to shoot at them is going to find themselves getting dimensional instability stacked up to the 9s while being teleported around the map randomly, and incapable of firing half the time. So it's a really, really gross, powerful upgrade, which I think is a little bit overly good, but at the same time you don't need it, and it is very expensive. So the only thing that's going to stop you from getting this is that you do need to get enough money to start applying this to your big monstery things. Alright, so let's take a look at some of the units that I've been building here. So as you can see, I have got some of these really big, powerful units, and I have not bothered like giving my Hopper Hound Eviscerators, despite the fact I think I've got like 5 Hopper Hound Eviscerators or something ridiculous like that. These things are so powerful, and it costs so much to upgrade these guys that I just haven't had a chance to. Now, if I did have a longer game and I did have a chance to start upgrading these guys, this is one of the ones that I think does really benefit from the Stasis Pocket Inducer as well as Quantum Avatar. This makes it so that this unit is basically going to instantly like lock down anything that really is kind of messing with me. And then you can throw on the Advanced Instinct Control module and make it a little bit more powerful in that sort of sense there. This sort of combination is not only ridiculous on the offense, this thing is really, really hard to kill. If you had 2 Hopper Hound Eviscerators sort of running along one another with the Invigorating Stridulation or something like that, you'd have a really hard time killing one of these. The only problem here is that this thing costs 64 Cosmite to produce this, so yeah. And I've got 2 of these guys, and one of them apparently is slightly modded. We've also got some Hopper Hound Blade mods, those I haven't bothered upgrading, the Wild Bombardon. Similar sort of story here. This is a heavy type of unit that we just managed to pick up here. This one's longer range though, thanks to the Grand Secretion being long range. So you can just go like Animal Controller, the whatever. And you could potentially throw on the Dazzler systems if you really wanted to, or the Phase Drive or Quantum Avatar. This is all a little bit less necessary just because this guy tends to stay out in the back there a little bit further and is not really as much up close. Thunder mods. This one we did actually upgrade. It's got like the Advanced Instinct Controller because this guy is melee and is a little bit more... I find it a little bit harder to keep this guy alive since... he doesn't have the ability to make himself a bit faster. I did give this guy the Regenerative Bio Regulator, which is also quite powerful, as well as the Acidic Composite. You could give stuff like... I could replace this thing, for example, with the Quantum Avatar as well. That would also be quite strong. I could also give him Stasis Pocket Inducer. In this case, I think actually the Stasis Pocket Inducer might be stronger, because you can actually apply that to Thunderous Burst. So there's a bunch of monsters that I've been getting. I think that's most of what I've been getting in terms of random monsters that I've been finding. So for our Amazons here, we haven't really applied much here. I did add in the Void Augmentation here. The problem is that it just is not really that effective. I would much rather replace this out with a standard sort of upgrade for Amazons like the Earthlink Mask or something like that. I think that would be more effective than the Void Augmentation. So I can't really think of a Void Augmentation that I really, really like for these guys. Next up, we have access to the Echo Walkers here. The ones that we've gone here have the Grounding Harness, and part of this is because we're fighting off against a lot of Synthesis in this particular match, but also because I do want that stagger resistance on these guys. It's always important to have stagger resistance on your melees, but it is a little bit less important on these guys. If I wasn't up against Synthesis and up against a lot of arc damage, I probably would actually drop that. The reason is that these guys start off with 3 actions, and unless you eliminate all 3 of their actions, you know, they're still going to be able to do their attack on their round, so they'll still at least be able to do some damage. Whereas if you've got repeating attacks, every time you take a stagger, you reduce your damage. Now, being staggered during your turn does mean you lose melee overwatch, so it is still good to have stagger resistance with these guys, it's just a little bit less important. Then we've also got the Advanced Instinct Controller. I would like to have replaced that by now with the Spirit Link module, but I don't have enough money. And then we've also got the Regenerative Bio Regulators. And I do actually think that the Regenerative Bio Regulators are pretty good on these guys, just because these guys tend to get a lot of damage by being up front so often. So pretty good idea to have those on there. Next up, we've got access to... I think that actually might be pretty much every... Oh yeah, there were all these guys down here, the Quartzite Crystal Bashers and the Quartzite Crystal... I actually got quite a lot of Quartzite Crystal Bashers. I don't really bother upgrading these guys, they don't get the best upgrades. Oh, right. Scouts. So their scouts are actually pretty powerful. This is one of the ones where I tried out the Gravity Pulse Grenade. Did not work out that well. It's not amazing for these guys to have those, but it is kind of okay. I would say that throwing on something like a... let's see, what would I throw for the last thing on this guy? Possibly something like the Regenerative Bio Regulator would be pretty good here. These guys are pretty weak is the main problem with them. They're very, very fragile, so it's pretty easy to kill them. But they're actually surprisingly strong in terms of what they're capable of doing out in the battlefield. So I do think that you could use these guys as a fairly inexpensive early game type of unit. Late game, it's a little bit more complicated, so you're generally not going to see these guys with a ton of mods on them because they're a really good combatant early game. Probably want to shift away from them later on. Alright, and I think that is pretty much everything that I was actually using. This is one of the instances where I didn't bother building very many of the Biomancers, and the reason is that despite the Biomancer's strength, I'm kind of just running this one on pure economy and pure spam. So let's take a look at our armies here, and you can see the grotesqueness that is how much army I've got in this case. This is the final sort of push, and this was the final battle before I actually beat the game, because I always beat the game before I do these. So this is the push that I had going down here. It's got an upgraded Amazon, it's got some of these weird furries that the Therians gave me, and it's got an Echo Walker and a Quartzite Crystal Basher. Over here we've got a Quartzite Crystal Worm, a Manipulator, a Hopperhound Blade Maw, 3 Amazon Huntresses. Over here we've got a Hero, a Destroyer, 2 Echo Walkers, my Biomancer, and another Huntress. Over here we've got access to another Hero, another Echo Walker, and a Huntress. Over here we've got access to a Hero, a Quartzite Crystal Basher, another one of those furries, and 2 more Huntresses. And over here we've got 2 Arborean Sentinels, another Biomancer, and 3 Huntresses. This is that sort of free warmongering army that you got. And this is kind of a ridiculous number of armies to have committed to this, but that's because we've also got lots of other forces over here. This is another Hopperhound Eviscerator, as well as our Hero, and a bunch of furries. Over here we've got another Hopperhound Eviscerator, another Hero, a couple of these Echo Walkers, a Biomancer, and another Huntress. And then we've got another of these Thundermaws. And I think we've got some more armies elsewhere. But what really should impress upon you is not the composition that I've got here. There's nothing really that special about the composition as I've got it here. What really kind of is important about the composition that I'm running is just how many units I've got out in the field here, as well as the fact that I've got a ton of income still coming in. Over here we've got another stack here. It's got another Thundermaw, Quartzite Crystal Basher, a random truck, another Echo Walker, another Prowler, and another Huntress. Now you can have better organized armies, and I definitely would recommend it if you've got the wherewithal to manage that, but it doesn't really matter at this sort of scale and this sort of scope in terms of like the number of units that I've got. I also lost a ridiculous number of units in this particular playthrough because I was just sort of capable of throwing them very recklessly against the enemy. And yeah, that's kind of what makes this combination special, is just how strong the economy bonuses are for this sort of setup here. How much am I paying for upkeep here? Let's see, my unit upkeep's only 264, which is much lower than I would expect, but I guess part of that's because my primary production center is that minus 30% upkeep bonus, so that applies to that to some degree. Normally, tier 3's low economy upkeep here or something like that? What's the upkeep of a Hopperhound Eviscerator? I can't actually remember what the hell the oh, right, because I actually have to check the specific unit and not the general, I think. Or I have to check the wiki instead of that. Alright, you Quartzite Crystal Basher, what is your upkeep? Your upkeep's only 8. Okay, well this explains a lot, because normally a tier 3 unit actually has a much, much higher upkeep cost. Like, we could check out... I think we've got a Rift Generator. So the fact that they actually only have that much in terms of like upkeep costs, the animals, I'd never really bothered to check that, feels kind of gross to me. Oh, no, tier 3 upkeep 8. Okay, so that feels like that must be standard, I guess. Well, in any event, though, yeah, we're capable of producing like huge armies really, really quickly there. Also, we're even using Clone Predator again here, just spamming it out every chance that we get here. It's really, really powerful. It's capable of getting us a lot of those units that we've been getting that are just more powerful than normal. Apply that with the Advanced Wildlife Militarization, and you're going to wind up with these units that are capable of doing a lot more damage, applying ecological warfare to them as well. All of that makes these guys much, much stronger. So anyhow, that is our look at the Voidtech combination with the Amazons. Not my favorite, but it is a lot more interesting than I expected it to be, and it does fit my playstyle actually pretty well. So in any event, I hope you found this episode enjoyable, and of course, as always, hope to see you guys all next time.